Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ, the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be taking a look at the California recall election, which will be occurring tomorrow, September 14th. It's hard to believe the recall election is already here. I remember talking about it months before it was happening, and now it is literally tomorrow. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the current polling for the recall, and ultimately my final prediction of what I think is going to happen tomorrow or in the next few days, depending on how long it takes to tabulate the results. I know California notoriously is very slow at counting election results, at least finalizing election results. We saw that in the 2020 election, which I guess was a bit of an anomaly, but we also saw it in the 2016 and 2020 primaries as well. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some polling out of the recall, and the no votes on the recall as of right now in the latest polls have been winning pretty overwhelmingly in the latest polls. And it turns out, it looks like, the Survey USA poll, which has a small sample size and also a large margin of error, was probably an outlier based on the overall polling trajectory. Now, yes, there was a period in the summer where the recall, the yes vote on recall, was a lot better and was faring a lot better in the results. But as we obviously moved on, as the recall campaign was dragged out, it gave the Newsom campaign more time to change the narrative on the recall. You know, he calls it a Republican recall. And the word Republican is kryptonite for any politician or policy really in California, to be quite honest. And I think that's what really changed the dynamic of this race. You know, we talked about in my last video on the recall, my last two really, how the recall was getting a lot more competitive. And we see now that that's just not really the case anymore. The recall is not really that competitive. It doesn't mean that, Newsom can't recall. It could possibly happen. But it's a very, very, very slim chance at this point. And, back in July, back in August, it seemed like a very high possibility that Newsom was in trouble. But, within the last month or so, he and Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, all the others have really been able to change the narrative on the recall. They've spun it as a Republican recall. And, they basically have made the argument that, well, if you don't vote for us, Republicans are going to run the state into the abyss, which is something Newsom has said very often. Now, Democrats have spent millions of dollars on this recall. I'm not actually sure how much money Republicans have spent, but I know it's a lot too. I believe Huckabee's Super PAC spent $250,000 in this race. A lot of money was spent on this race, but ultimately Democrats are spending a lot of money on a race that really shouldn't have been competitive. This shouldn't have been a competitive race given California's partisan nature. California is one of the most democratic states in the country. In fact, I think only Vermont, Massachusetts, and Maryland are bluer than the state of California. California comes in at fourth, unless I'm missing a state. Oh, and Hawaii. Forgot about Hawaii. But no, in 2020, California voted only slightly to the right of Hawaii, which usually California votes significantly more to the right than a state like Hawaii. But looking at the 2020 results, the last election back in November, Republican Donald Trump only got 34.3% of the vote. He only got a little bit over a third of the vote. That's a big difference from, somebody like Mitt Romney, who I believe got 38, maybe even 39, but I think it was 38% of the vote. And, that's, millions of votes, hundreds of thousands of votes in a state like California. All the population centers, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, etc., all solidly Democratic. The thing that helps Newsom out is that Democrats are the default option in a state like California, similar to how Republicans are the default option in a state like Kansas or Wyoming. That's just how safe states works. The majority of people in California are liberal or Democratic leaning. I think registered independents make up a pretty big share of voters in California, but the vast majority of them vote Democratic, and that's why you have a state as blue as California. And I think Republicans are only 15%, registered Republicans are only like 15 or 20% of the overall state voting population or something. I don't know. Don't fact check me on that because I could be wrong. But point I'm trying to make is California is one of the bluest states in the entire country. The fact that this race is kind of close is certainly bad news for Democrats, or at least the fact that it could have been close. But it could also have been the media itself trying to make a story out of this, considering there's not a whole lot, I guess, in the news in terms of actual elections going on. We don't have the midterms for over another year. We do have Virginia and New Jersey this year, but, you know, those races haven't gotten as much news as I would have thought they would, particularly Virginia. You know, as somebody who follows this, I've read up a lot about the Virginia governor's race and stuff like that. But, you know, ultimately in mainstream society, the vast majority of people have no idea there's a governor's race in Virginia and New Jersey. But that's beside the point. The polling has changed dramatically in this race, and part of that is the Democrats' messaging has gotten a lot better in terms of framing this recall as this is only a Republican initiative. And, of course, when Republicans are only a third of the voters in the last general election, less than a third of the voters in 2016, that really raises eyebrows for a lot of people. You know, Newsom's had, again, Biden, Harris, all these people campaigning for him, big Democratic names, because they knew enthusiasm was a big factor. It is a big factor in this race. If Democrats were apathetic and didn't turn out to vote, Newsom would be recalled, no question, because Republicans, I guarantee you, probably 90% of the people who voted in 2016, who voted for Trump, are probably going out there to recall Newsom. Why? Because they're Republicans. They despise Newsom's policies, and they probably despise Newsom as a person. They're going to come out and vote. You know, Joe Biden and the Democrats, they only need about maybe half of what Biden got, maybe a little bit over half of 2020 turnout. And I believe there's already been 6 or 7 million mail-in ballots already put in, and that's not even including what's going to be on Election Day. I think it's a game of numbers. I think Republicans, at this point, there's a very slim chance they can actually pull off a victory. And the reason why I say a Republican victory in the recall is because if we look at the polling out of the recall election, the first question on the California ballot is obviously whether Newsom should stay or go. Keeping Newsom is up 56-41. And of course, we have below the second question, who would replace Newsom? Elder is winning by over 20 points against all the other opponents. So that certainly is one of the reasons why the recall has swung the other way. Larry Elder is a very conservative person. He's a very conservative candidate. He's way to the right of the majority of Californians. And like I said in my video talking about Elder, there's some issues where Californians are actually somewhat socially conservative or have the more quote-unquote right-wing position on certain issues like the death penalty, stuff like that. But overall, California voters are left-wing. There's no denying that. And when you have somebody who's not just a Republican, but who goes even further, is, you know, a Trump-like Republican, which, you know, doesn't really play well in California, it really hurts the recall effort. And I think one of the things that really hurt the recall was the focus on Larry Elder, him as the boogeyman on the right. And ultimately, that definitely hurt the recall. Gavin Newsom and Democrats able to frame this not about Gavin Newsom, but about Larry Elder and the direction of California. And they've nationalized this race. You know, the old saying is that, you know, all politics is local, but, you know, nowadays all politics really is national. You know, every race, whether it's a special election for a House seat, whether it's a governor's race, anything like that, they've all become nationalized. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, almost every red state, with the exception of like 3 or 4, have Republican governors and vice versa for Democratic states. It's because, you know, you used to have a time period where people would separate political party to some extent when it came to like governors and state representatives, etc. That era is long gone. And, you know, this is just a prime example of that, this is roughly going to go down by party lines at the end of the day, which is one of the reasons why I think that Newsom is going to stay, and I think he's going to stay by a considerable margin, because while Republicans have a lot of enthusiasm, Democrats just need to have lackluster enthusiasm to match that, and just general sort of enthusiasm to top it. You know, I personally think that the polls have it at 56-41. I think it could go either way in the sense that Democrats could overperform the polls or they could underperform the polls. We could see a situation where, you know, yes on recall gets 44% of the vote, and, you know, Democrats get like 56, or maybe it gets 45% of the vote. I can't really see yes on recall getting over 45% of the polls of the vote. I would be truly shocked by that, and it would ultimately be a very good sign for Republicans going forward into 2022. But my final prediction, I actually think that this is going to be a 59-41, roughly around there, with the no on recall getting roughly 59% of the vote to the yes on recall being around 41 or so. Give or take a few points, you know, maybe like 1 or 2. But that's roughly the area where I'd see it, because I think the vast majority of independents, the people who aren't informed about this recall, are going to break for Newsom. And that's what I think we've been seeing also as this recall has been happening. When the recall started, you know, way back when, all the way back in 2019, you didn't have, you know, any interest or anyone even knowing about the recall. And I think you even saw that in the summer. I saw plenty of interviews all over online and such of people, you know, interviewing California voters. They had no idea there was a recall happening. Now there's Newsom ads bombarding the airways. There's, you know, elder ads, I'm sure, all over the place as well in California. People know there's an election now, whereas they didn't over the summer. And the pool of likely voters changes considerably. You know, you go from likely voters being, you know, majority Republican, or at least plurality Republican, to now where most likely voters are Democrats, because more Democrats are hearing about the recall and they're actually getting out and voting. And I think the fact that in California every registered voter gets a mail-in ballot certainly plays into a factor as to why Democrats are going to win. Because if Democrats aren't that enthusiastic, they could simply, you know, just fill in a ballot and put it in their mailbox and that's it. Whereas if this was an election where you actually had to go to the polls, I think it would be a little bit tighter. I'm not saying, you know, yes on recall would win, but I think it would be tighter because the enthusiasm gap, I think, is there. Even though Democrats are not nearly as fired up to keep Newsom as Republicans are to remove him, but Democrats only need lackluster support to actually get, you know, to get Newsom, to keep him in power. You know, we could take a look at the last governor's race in California based on polling. Now, polling in swing states, safe states rather, is a little challenging because they tend to be a bit off. In this instance, the polls actually, in some ways, overestimated John Cox, at least, you know, some of these polls, but some of them vastly underestimated. You know, John Cox getting 41% of the vote, overestimation, but then you have some where John Cox is only at 34%. It's an underestimation. You really have to look at the undecideds and all that, because California polling can go either way. It could either oversample Democrats or undersample. And polling isn't a science, and quite frankly, I don't trust polling that much, but I think that when you have numbers this big, you know, the biggest mistake in 2020 with a lot of the polls was like a margin of 9 points, which is huge. But we're talking about margins of 15 points. If Republicans win this recall, they really have and will have defied all odds. And this would certainly discredit all polling. But, you know, polling aside, California is still a very Democratic state. It's a state where more people, more Democrats are enthused to vote than they were over the summer. And I think ultimately that's going to favor Gavin Newsom and the Democrats come tomorrow. So my final prediction, I think the yes on recall is only going to get around 41% of the vote. I think the no on recall is probably going to get around 59%. Give or take a point or two, but I think it's roughly going to be in that range. I think, again, you have no on recall at around, 56 or so. You have yes at around 41. I think all the undecideds, most of them are going to break for no on recall when it's all said and done. But anyway, that's my final prediction for the recall tomorrow. Certainly, regardless of what side you're on, you should probably get out and vote if you're informed and know what's going on. If you watch this channel, you're certainly informed. Anyway, guys, thank you all for watching this video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.